Blog Talk Radio.
You are now listening to True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. Gacy, Bundy, Dahmer, The Night Stalker, BTK. Every week, another fascinating author talking about the most shocking and infamous killers in true crime history. True Murder, with your host, journalist and author, Dan Zupansky.
Good evening. This is your host, Dan Zupansky, for the program True Murder, the most shocking killers in true crime history, and the authors that have written about them. When prison inmate Robert Reldan's aunt died and left him an $8.9 million trust fund, Arthur and Barbara Reeve, parents of murder victim Susan Reeve, acted to deprive Reldan of the funds that could gain him freedom on parole. The Reeves ultimately got an unheard of $10 million judgment against their daughter's killer, effectively stripping the man known as America's richest inmate. Soon after Susan's murder, the Reeves set up a scholarship fund in her name, and the killer's money is currently used in that fund, which helps to educate young men and women. The charmer embraces the hunt to bring Susan's killer to justice, and then the chase of a lifetime of one family determined to give their slain daughter a voice, decades after she was silenced. The book this evening that we're going to be profiling is The Charmer, the true story of Robert Reldan, rapist, murderer, and millionaire, and the women who fell victim to his allure, by Richard Muti and Charles Buckley. And with me this evening, I have Charles Buckley on the line. And thank you, Charles Buckley, for agreeing to this interview, and welcome to True Murder.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you very much. And then our audience is going to be very interested in this story. We've had, the audience is probably very familiar with people that murder in the family, but this is much more, it's got some twists in there to the usual plot. So this, I think the audience is really going to enjoy this one. Now, let's start off with given a time frame for this, because this is not a crime that occurred recently. So give us the time frame and give us the community that Robert Reldan grew up in. Give us what his parents were like, and tell us a little bit about the life of Robert Reldan, so we can really understand the character of this very fascinating killer. So take us back to sort of where these crimes are starting in the mid-'70s, but let's go back to Robert Reldan and where he grew up and how he grew up and what his parents were like. Take us back to there, please.
Well, Reldan grew up with a pretty steady family situation. I mean, the father and mother owned a restaurant in New York City. The aunt was very wealthy. There was a sister, Susan, who was part of the family, and it was a well put together family. There seemed to be no reason why Robert Reldan would deviate from developing into a fine young man. But before he was even 18 years old, he had gotten involved in a series of juvenile incidents involving assaults on women, guns in cars, things of that nature. He went through the juvenile system in the state of New Jersey, and several times he was given psychiatric treatments at state hospitals. On 2 occasions, he was directed by the juvenile courts he could be on probation, but he had to undergo psychiatric treatment. On each occasion, he just went once and then didn't bother to come again. His Aunt Lillian had married very well. She married Ferris Booth, who was the son of one of the founders of IBM, himself a multimillionaire. Right. He died after approximately 10 years of the relationship, leaving her $50 million. She became one of the focal points in the family in that she was generous with her money to the family. She was extremely generous to society in terms of giving millions of dollars to hospitals, to actors' homes and things of that nature. And that may have been one of the problems which sent Robert Reldan off on the tangent that ultimately resulted in 2 murders. He seemed to feel that he was being shortchanged, that the $1,000 gift at Christmas time was not enough for him. The brand new Volkswagen she gave him when he came out of prison was not enough for him because she was buying a Cadillac, 2 Cadillacs every year for herself and her live-in friend. So this disturbed Reldan. It seemed to be on this basis he developed this hatred, and this was really brought forth in all the psychiatric reports. There was a hatred towards women. It just he focused on them, and all the psychiatrists seem to believe it came from this stilted idea of what the relationship should be between Aunt Lillian and himself. So the parents continually supported him all through his criminal career. In fact, you recall the case where he planned while in state prison to have his Aunt Lillian murdered in order to gain his inheritance early. And
well, let's not. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here for the audience,
okay,
because I think that we're really
way past
talking. Yeah, we're just going a little bit fast, and this story really lends itself to really explaining this. Now, what you have described is that despite his upbringing, we got to say that it wasn't just his aunt that had money. His family had money, and like you say, you were alluding to and intimating about his family supporting him through, even though his juvenile delinquency. It was much more than that, wasn't it? Because you say that it really was excusing him.
They didn't have money in the sense of it like Aunt Lillian had it. They were comfortable with their business income and everything. But there were no shortages in the household. They lived in Closter, which was a very nice community in what's called the Northern Valley area of Bergen County. Middle-class home, no problems that anyone was aware of. But Reldan just started on this course of juvenile activities, breaking into homes, stealing cars, stealing tires, which, as I said, ended up continued problems with the juvenile court system in New Jersey. He ultimately was convicted in New York. What happened in New York? He was arrested for a theft of an automobile. Now, they didn't want to waste the time in New York on this peanut charge, but he had this ongoing juvenile probation in New York State. So what they did was they sentenced him under that violation of probation to 3 years in the prison in New York State. He served his time, got out of Great Meadows, where he had served his time, and within a month he sexually assaulted a woman in Fort Lee. And that was the beginning, really, of his adult criminal activities. He then went down to Florida, committed 2 minor crimes down there, and then came back to North Arlington, back to New Jersey, was arrested. Now we're in 1963 now. Just back for the assault on Marie Hernandez was a month after he was paroled. The 2 crimes in Florida were in December of 62 and January of 63. In December of 1963, he's arrested for about 10 various crimes in New York State and in New Jersey. So, I mean, he really had begun to accumulate criminal episodes in his life all the time, living at home when he wasn't in jail and being supported by his family.
But it wasn't just a matter of theft, though, because like you say, there's a rape. There is this added, and we'll talk about it later when he talks about to people that later informed the police about his attitude about women. There's a particular joke that he says about what one pedophile would say to another. It really is an indication of the psychopathic mind. I know it's maybe a cliche, but this guy at a very early age, maybe 15 or so, really shows all those tendencies towards very home invasions, sexual assault, theft for no reason. Really doesn't need the money that much. It's not really, he's not poor or anything. There seems to be, so it really seems to be a portrait of a psychopathic killer that keeps accelerating and his ego is incredible, and of course he's narcissistic, and it gets in his way. Ultimately, it's a very interesting story. So by the time, tell us what age, and by what age is he now in contact with this Ana Maria Hernandez, and tell us about that crime, because that's really the beginning of how the most serious stuff he's doing.
That's his first serious criminal activity. He was born in 1940. He was released from serving out the juvenile sentence for the violation of his probation. He was released on January 16th of 62. Now he's 22 years old, but this was as a juvenile. This probation was granted. Within a month, he and another individual entered this home where Maria Hernandez was staying with her sister, and he tied her up and started sexually assaulting her. Fortunately for Maria, the other co-conspirator, the other guy involved in the break-in, came in and told Reldan to knock it off and let's get on what we have to do, trying to steal the money. And he did stop at that time after mishandling her and touching her in an attempt to begin a sexual assault. So he's only at that time, at 62, he's 22 years old. He's a month out of prison. He then he leaves the state then. I think he's looking to get away from the possibility this may come back to haunt him, although he hadn't been identified yet. And as I said, he went to Florida, he went to Missouri for a while, he was in Connecticut, but then he came back to New Jersey. And in the summer of 63, he's now 23 years old. He's arrested by the Closter police carrying a gun in the car. He's arrested by the North Arlington police in New Jersey for breaking and entering and striking a woman with a tire iron, the resident of the house. He's arrested by the Fort Lee police on the Maria Hernandez assault. This is almost a year later when they finally get around to identifying him. So in the meantime, while all this is going on in New Jersey, he is making daily trips over the George Washington Bridge, committing a series of assaults on elderly women in the northwest area of Manhattan Island, where he follows them into an elevator. And this goes to his allure, his charm. He's very polite. He presses the elevator button for him. He only gets in if there's one woman on the elevator. And they are just put at ease by his manner. He has this just charming way about him. Every woman who's involved in these as victims talks about the initial response to him is one of trust and confidence. And what he does then, his signature is to grab them by the throat, choke them, steal their pocketbook or jewelry, whatever, get out of the elevator, press a button, and send them up while he runs and goes in hiding. And the New York police finally track him over to New Jersey in early 1964. That's for these 1963 crimes. And the end result of all this is he works out plea bargains all over the place. And the deal is he'll plead to anything as long as it doesn't involve violence or assaults on women. He pleads to the guns in the car. He pleads to the break-in entries. And for 10 crimes, for 10 separate crimes, he receives what is in effect 1 5-year sentence. And he does that in New York. And New Jersey just throws their sentences in to do in New York State. And after all this, he's paroled in September of 1966, having done only 2.5 years for all these 10 crimes. So, I mean, he's really moving up the ladder very quickly. 67.
How does he get the plea? How does he get the plea agreement? So who's paying for the lawyers during this time?
It's Aunt Lillian. It has the money, as far as we know. He does hire the best attorneys. I mean, every time he's involved in a crime, he has a quality attorney working for him, and they do a good job. I mean, in New Jersey, Frank Luciani, who is a very, very good Bergen County attorney, works out this deal, which is New Jersey throws the whole thing away and says, the 5 years in New York is enough. Get out of here. We don't even want to be bothered with you. So, I mean, that's how he was able to move along. And he's paroled after doing only 2.5 years for 10 crimes, 7 of which involved assaults on women, sexual assaults, some non-sexual, just violent robberies, things of that nature. So he had moved. Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, so now he had really moved along, and he's coming out of jail after 2.5 years in September of 1966. And in the meantime, he goes to Florida. Now, here's one of the problems. He and his father do not have a very good relationship. His mother, he doesn't think much of his mother because she's so easy to get over on. He just, she'll do whatever he wants. But he doesn't get along well with his father. And he's on parole, but he gets permission to go to Florida with his father. The father is thinking of starting another restaurant down there. And he meets Judith Rosenberg, and within a day, she says she's already fallen in love with him. And that's the kind of effect he has on women. He is just that personable, that engaging, that women fall for him. She says she fell in love with him the first day. She's married. She has an abusive husband. He's involved with a mob in Illinois. He can't go with her because he's under indictment in Illinois. Reldan and Judith Rosenberg become quite friendly in a very short time. She goes back, and her husband is found murdered in the trunk of a car. She immediately calls Reldan and asks him to come out and stay with her. Reldan is on parole. He can't leave the state without permission. He just goes immediately and leaves and goes out and see Judith. So they have, in a day or so, just formed this strong relationship. Now, this is in January of 1967. He meets her and gets started with her. Now, April of 1967, 2 months later, is when he commits his rape of Bernice Kaplan in Tenafly in New Jersey. And again, using a chokehold, he gains entry into her house by posing as someone making a delivery of cleaning material, pants, things of that nature. She is at first leery, but being confidence built into her by his charm and his gentle manner, she lets him come into the house. Then he rapes her. I mean, it's just that easy for him. He threatens to kill her if she doesn't give in to his demands. He threatens to kill her son. If he shows up, she claims he's coming in, you better run, thing of that nature. He says, I'll kill him if he goes, I have a gun. So he gets away with him. He has that crime. He's immediately arrested within 2 days because the identification is so easy. Him being on parole, he's easy forced to come into a police station where she sees him and identifies him. But now one of the fluky things starts. He has a trial. They've got all this evidence against him. The specific identification by Mrs. Kaplan, and the identification of the car by a resident who lives in that area, Keith Strickland. He sees the car and he just says that car that was parked outside her house was Reldan's car, and he identified it as the car which was there. He goes to trial and there's a hung jury. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But Reldan has the family behind him. They're in court every day. He's nice. He smiles at the jury, acting very polite, very condescending. And someone on the jury, we don't know who or how many, they refuse to convict him. So now he's developing this skill in front of juries that I'm a nice guy. I wouldn't do anything like this. Look at my family with me. And there's a hung jury. Now, you know yourself, hung juries are rare in criminal cases. I mean, that happens, but the general run-of-the-mill, either he's guilty or he's not guilty. But here we have a hung jury. He's tried again, and this time he's convicted, fortunately. And he receives a sentence to the prison with a mandatory, a maximum of 30 years in jail for the rape. To do his time at a treatment center, not the real basic prisons routine that would be in place, and he comes in touch with a man who's the psychologist at the prison, Prendergast, who almost falls in love. He's under the spell of Reldan himself, and this guy starts writing parole letters for Reldan. within 3 years, based on Prendergast's strong urging to the parole board that this is not a sexual pervert. This crime had to do with his hatred of his aunt and his mother, and he's now cured of that problem. Let him out of jail. He gets out of jail. Within 5 months, he assaults another woman. So Blanche Mott in Metuchen by attacking her in her car, trying to rob her and possibly rape her too. So now we're talking, it's up to 71. He's now into his third sexual assault charge. They send him back to jail again, and he stays in jail on this initial 30-year rape charge, and now he gets 5 to 7 years on the assault on Blanche Mott in Middlesex County, but he's finally paroled in May of 1975. And that takes us up to everything up to before the murders.
Now, before we go any further, you have an excellent photo. You've chosen to just have basically the title of the book, and
right.
then the mugshot, basically, of Richard. That's
Robert the rape. So that was the rape arrest.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, pardon me. Okay. So now, tell us what he looks like, because this is what the audience doesn't know. What does he look like? What's his hairstyle? How can he get it over with all these people? He's wooing the psychologist. Obviously, he's an intelligent guy. Tell us. I was going to ask that question. He's an intelligent guy, but given he's a pretty bright guy. But tell us
he's very bright.
Tell us about that. But tell us what he looks like. Describe his weight, his height, his build, his hair. How could this guy charm all these women and almost everybody he comes across?
Well, he's 6 foot, 6'1", clean shaven for most of his life. I don't remember ever seeing any picture or anything where he has any hair, facial hair. He has a nice brown hair that he neatly combed. He's handsome. I don't know how to explain what his looks. He's just a handsome guy with a tremendous personality, which just radiates from him. He knows how to turn on the charm. One of the reasons the parents just couldn't believe he had raped Mrs. Kaplan was because he had so many girlfriends. The time he raped Mrs. Kaplan, he had 2 girlfriends in New Jersey that they didn't know about each other, and he also had Judith Rosenberg from Illinois, who he ultimately married. But women just were all over him, no matter whatever it is and what charm he has. I never have really spoken to the man, but the women who have dealt with him saying his initial contact with them just causes them to drop their guard. So it's hard to explain what he looks like. He's a good-looking guy, and he's very muscular, well-built, well-mannered. He's got a lot going for him, and he brags about his ability with women. I mean, that's one of his strong points. Is he's telling people in jail, the Williams brothers, he never had any trouble with women. So that's his makeup. Yeah.
Okay. So now you've got everything. You've got us all caught up in this criminality up to the murder itself.
Right.
Now, the key person in this too is this Judith Rosenberg. Very interesting, like you say. She's apparently with some gangster, and then just after she meets Reldan, he's killed. Well, what a happy coincidence! And then they get together because he really can rely on this woman, and it's understandable once given who she was already hooked up with, So maybe that's why he seemed to be charming. Of course, maybe he wasn't abusive, but he must have seemed like a preppy dream compared to maybe the mobster that she was, or gangster that she was with.
He's there. I think they're in Hollandia. I think in Florida is where they were. He's there with his family, his mother and father and sister. It's a nice family. He's a nice guy. She's there with her son. I mean, all the factors are coming together. She has a bad relationship. Here's a guy who has a nice family, friendly, charming, good-looking, showing attention to her, and she falls in love with him right away. In fact, she waits for him while he does his time on the Kaplan rape. I mean, she comes here. She stays in Illinois until he's about ready to get released because of all of Mr. Prendergast's effort, and she then comes right to live with the father and mother in Closter in Bergen County. And then when he does get paroled, they immediately get married, and they get together in a place up in just over the border into New York State, which is interesting because it's one of the heavy factors in terms of tying him to these murders, that where he lived was in close proximity to where these bodies are ultimately found. So it became an important piece of evidence.
Right. Now, tell us about just prior to the murders itself, and tell us the year again, what year we're talking about. And he'd been paroled not too long beforehand. So tell us about what is going on just previous to that, and then tell us, of course, about the first and the second murder.
He gets paroled finally on May 30th of 1975. He's got like a 22-year parole requirement. He's not supposed to be off parole until 1997. As I said, Judith has moved into New Jersey. In the meantime, she's gotten an apartment up in Valley Cottage, New York, where they're going to live. Of course, Reldan's not supposed to go out of state to reside. He's supposed to live in New Jersey, but he's taken a chance of living up in New York State with her, which would be a violation of parole. If he's caught, then he would be sent back to jail. So there's a lot of pressure on him. But they get married in almost immediately in June of 1975. And he takes, as far as we know, he takes his marriage very seriously. He does have another fling with another girl, Roberta Gimbel, who he takes to another place, exactly a place where the second body is initially located. I mean, she is an important witness in saying, well, that's within 100 feet of where Bobby and I had a picnic one day. This is early in July, probably, of 1975. So they live a couple of months as man and wife, and it seems, he's now into a business. He's got a contracting business, odd jobs. He'll do all kinds of construction, things like that. And he's the day the first woman disappears, he happens to go to over to Westwood, the Westwood area, to get his car engine cleaned. Now, I don't know if you want to get into the specific details of the where Mrs. Haynes was picked off, or just
sure.
Where you want me to go from here?
Sure, do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Reldan has to he wants his car engine cleaned, and he's over in the Westwood area. And Mrs. Haynes, at the same time, is in the Westwood area trying to get a job. She's here as a nurse. She's trying to get work. She doesn't want to be home alone. Her husband has his own job. And this is a very unique instance. Going back to the Kaplan rape, Reldan didn't know Mrs. Kaplan. He had never seen her, as far as we know. But he's got a problem. He's got these two girlfriends in the area. He's got Judith down in Florida, or now back in Illinois. And he's driving home from having been with one of the girlfriends in the morning. His father is pressuring him about this business they want to open up in Florida. And Reldan, his route home would take him right past the route that Mrs. Kaplan would pass coming home from delivering Passover cookies to her mother over in Hackensack. So the route they would take would bring them into close proximity. There is no reason where Reldan was in the area where Mrs. Kaplan lived. He had no business there. He didn't know her. There was that. It just a situation where he happened to see her. Now, whatever it was in his mind at that time which snapped, it was just that kind of incident with no rhyme or reason. He saw her, and he followed her. And he made the decision he was going to do what he did to her for some reason, and no one can explain it. We don't know why. But he follows her to the house, and as I said, he gains entry by a subterfuge, and then he rapes her. Well, the same thing happened to Mrs. Haynes. He's coming back from having the engine cleaned on the car. She's traveling the same road. It would be 4 or 5 miles that they're driving along this road, and at times they're all in sync with when she was at the office trying to get this job and when he was having the engine cleaned. And he sees her drive into her driveway, and he evidently goes down the street, turns around, comes back, and drives up in the driveway. He makes those kind of instantaneous decisions, whatever it was or whatever it causes it, the pressures of the day, what he was under. That seems to be the gist of why it happens. He's under, for some reason, he snaps because there's absolutely no contact between him and his victims at this stage of his life before the assaults occur. And he takes her and he gets control of her, and she disappears from the house. There's no sign of any problem in the house. Nothing's overturned. He didn't get into the house. He caught her in the driveway as she was leaving the house to go to the post office. So, and that was the last anyone saw of her. So that's the thing that jumps out at you with what happens at all of these things that happened. Blanche Muti, when he assaulted her in Middlesex County, he never saw her before. What happened there? He was coming out of the hospital from visiting Mr. Prendergast. He was having trouble at home because his salary had been cut at work, and he was having some money troubles, and he felt Aunt Lillian wasn't being as generous as she could to him. And all of a sudden, he sees Mrs. Mott drive by him, and he follows her out of the hospital parking lot, down the street, about a mile to her home in a big apartment complex, follows her around, lets her drive into her garage, and races down and attempts to assault and rape her. So it always seems that he's under some sort of tremendous pressure, mental pressure at the time he snaps and does these things. So that was Mrs. Haynes. And now the next week, that happened on October 6th of 75. On October 14th, he's sandblasting the house. He got a job sandblasting the house. His wife, who worked for a company in the area, got another coworker from her company to help him with the sandblasting. They're working hard all day long, but they don't accomplish as much as they wanted to because the sandblasting mask got broken. So it's a frustrating day for him. Things aren't going right. He's driving home now, and who does he see? Susan Reeve get off a bus, a pretty young girl, the bright dress, smiling, blonde, and he makes a sharp left turn. He's almost by it, according to the Fabricinis who see him, and he races up this street, passing her, and we think waiting for her to reach up a point further up the street. She has about a quarter of a mile to a half-mile walk to get to the area where her house is up that street, and he waits for her and grabs her as she's walking up that way, and she's taken in the car and never seen again. Now there are some witnesses, a special witness who happens to see a lot of this, but that's what happened, and it's always a pressure situation. It causes Reldan, I think, to snap and do these criminal acts.
Well, it could also be a psychopathic killer just accelerating. I mean, sure, obviously every killer probably has a stressor. I would say that, but you and I have bad days too. I might kick the tires or throw some against the wall and have to clean it up. I just got mad at an egg about an hour ago. But the thing is, it seems to be a classic acceleration as well. Within a week, 2 murders. I mean. Yeah, well on your way to serial killer fame and infamy, So
he just
now
just
what?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. What? Okay, so we're into the second week here. He has this murder. These people disappear from the face of the earth. Continue. How does he unwind, or how does he further unravel? What does he do? What does his wife do at this time? Where is his wife in all of this in terms of? He's doing this, but what's his, later, of course we're jumping the gun, but tell us what the police would know right at that time with this disappearance. These people were obviously called. Police were called, and they were noted as disappeared. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the first woman, she was an English bride, just a bride, and she was over here. Her husband worked at Leland Motors, British car company, and the initial thought about her was that she may have just gone somewhere. She was homesick. The husband knew she was homesick. She wanted to go back home. She wasn't really happy here. So the first thought was, this is just a woman who has gone off somewhere. And for several days, there was never a feeling that this was a crime. There was a crime involved here. It was more thought in terms of a woman who's just trying to resolve this unhappiness she's under because of the living conditions she's undergoing here.
Sure.
It's not till about 4 days where one of the police chief in Haworth, I think it was, makes a comment that we may be looking at something more than just an unhappy woman, unhappy wife. When the second girl, Susan Reeve, disappears, it's clear that there is a serious problem. And I lived in that area, what's called the Northern Valley area, and I can tell you, the disappearance of this second girl caused tremendous fear throughout the area. No one was certain as to what had happened, and it just was too coincidental to think that there's these two women. And even the first witness really wasn't sure that it was Reldan at that time. Reldan, who had been the one who was with Susan Reeves, his identification, Mr. Lozier, the problem was Reldan had been working in sandblasting all day long. He'd been doing it without a mask for most of the day, and he was covered with soot. He hadn't had time to clean up. And the initial description of Reldan was he was sort of Hispanic, dark, and it was really, it was confusing because the color that he had was because of the work he'd been doing. So,
right.
There was tremendous uncertainty as to just what the situation was. But what the police do in cases like this, they start looking through the recent parole list, of people who have sexual crimes of that nature. And Reldan's name came up very quickly. And here's the interesting part of this, how the case really, the solving of the case, if you're interested in this, the factors that really led to identifying him as the guy who was the probable killer, and yet the bodies hadn't even been discovered yet. Reldan, on the 21st day of October. Now, these two girls, one had disappeared on the 6th and one on the 14th. It's now the 21st day of October, and one of the jobs up at Tallman State Park, one of the people have to do is go down and check the chlorine level at the discharge from the pool. And there's an area where it flows into the river, and you test the water. And on the 21st, it's checked by Michael Bettman, and he finds that the chlorine is fine. And on the same day, Robert Reldan is over in Macy's trying to pawn a ring, an engagement ring. Now, this ring was not your typical engagement ring. It was a very special ring, specifically made and sold over in London at Harris, the big department store over there, and right. It was very easily identifiable. And on that day, he pawned it for $100. I think it was worth a lot more, but he took the $100. That night, he comes home, and there's a call from the prosecutor's office directing him to come down tomorrow to the prosecutor's office. They want to speak to him. He has to go because he's out on parole. But now he's thinking, yesterday I pawned the ring. They're making me come down today. He had no idea how much they knew or anything, and they really didn't know anything. They just wanted him to come in to speak to him. So he's spoken to, and now he panics. The next day, he goes back to Macy's, and he wants his ring back. They have to keep it for 15 days. If somebody wants to redeem it, they have to let them buy it back. But the ring can't be found, and he causes such a stink in the office, screaming about this ring he's got to have. They have to call security to calm him down. Finally, the ring is found, and he leaves with the ring, and that's the last time that ring is ever seen. But now, later on, security, when he's arrested later for these a couple of stupid break-ins to houses, security from Macy's calls the prosecutor's office and tells them about this situation involving the ring. If he hadn't made such a stink, that never would have happened. They never would have found it. And the ring and his possession of it was the most vital piece of evidence they had. This ring belonged to Mrs. Haynes, and it was the most significant piece of evidence we had with respect to who murdered her. So what happened then, the bodies are found in a couple of days. The first body is found by Michael Shanley, I think was the name. Let me see. Up in the reservoir at Clarkstown. So in Lake DeForest, Matthew Shanley, he finds the body of Susan Haynes. The body is really pretty well eaten up by animals, decaying, things of that nature. The next morning, now this is right where Reldan and Judith Rosenberg were living after he got married, after he came out of jail. This is right in the immediate area where they lived. The next morning, the body of Susan Reeve is found, and that's found in Tallman State Park. That is exactly where Reldan and Roberta Gimbel had a picnic on a day in August in 1975, a month or so before this happened. And the interesting thing was that body was found by the fellow who comes down to check the chlorine level again. It wasn't there on the 21st, but it is there on the 28th, I think, 29, whatever the date was. And the body, the second body, had willow leaves. As the body had started to disintegrate, willow leaves had fallen on it and started to become imbued in the body as it started to bleach out as the body started melting. And there were no willow leaves in that particular area. Not willow trees in that area, but where Susan Haynes' body was found, there were plenty of willow trees. So the body, which had not been in the water in the Tallman State Park, clearly had been at a different location at least some period of time, and it was in that week between the time of the two examinations of the water in the pipe leaving the pool, and that's exactly when Reldan got panicked and started to do things to try and cover up these murders. And one of the things that he admitted to the Williams brothers while he was in jail, that he had moved the bodies, and he shouldn't have done that. He tried to put them up in New York State to get away from police looking at him, and it just didn't work. And moving the bodies, he said, was a mistake. So they were the things that really started, made everyone pretty sure that Reldan was the person who was involved in these killings.
So now, did police have enough evidence, or when did police have enough evidence, and what did they do as a result of that evidence in terms of charging them for the murder? Was there a grand jury? Tell us how it was proceeded.
They didn't do anything. They were gathering evidence. The sandblasting mask was found on the street, right up the street from where Miss Reeve disappeared, within 25 yards of where, she was pulled into the car, and we think that the mask got kicked out during the struggle. That was an important piece of evidence. It was a sandblasting mask with the glass plate kicked out. There was people who had seen them in close proximity to a car, which was exactly like the car that Reldan had, and there's a picture of it in the book. It's a truck car, really loaded with working equipment, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So they didn't do anything yet, and they're still trying to accumulate evidence because, like, the call from Macy's didn't come for a week or so. But we were told, the police were told, that Reldan, if he was the one who did these murders, the psychologist from Trenton Hospital, not Prendergast, but one of his associates, said he's likely to do something really stupid deliberately to get caught, to sort of get him in jail and take him out of the crosshairs of this murder investigation. So what happens on the 30th and 31st of October, he commits 2 daylight break-in entries, one right across the street where he's doing his sandblasting on that doctor's house in the daytime with his car there, and one on another one in a house in Norwood where he climbs right on the second story, right where the woman's in the bedroom, and he runs away. He's caught and put in jail. He almost immediately pleads guilty to those. He gets sent away for 2 to 3 years in state's prison on the 2 B&Es. And his hope is they're going to forget about me now. They got other things to do. I'm here in state's prison. But so the police do nothing. They continue really just to try and accumulate evidence against him. So you don't arrest him. And matter of fact, he was never arrested on these charges. He was actually indicted when the investigation was concluded, but he had never been arrested on them. And it's in the prison that he, on these charges, that he meets the Williams brothers, and he gets involved in this plan to murder his aunt, to try and get money. He hires Edward Bennett Williams' firm, Williams and Conley, a big-time Washington, D.C. law firm. His aunt gives him $75,000 to pay for the initial representation. It'll probably cost him $1.5 million altogether, but she gives him $75,000 off the bat, maybe $200,000 to representation. In any event, she gives him the money to hire them, and it turns out now the police are undergoing this second investigation involving the plan to kill the aunt. And he's arrested on that charge while he's in prison as he's planning this murder, and they back right out of the case. They leave New Jersey then, and they're not going to represent him on the murder case. But okay, he then has...
Sorry, Charles. Let's go back a little bit because you're skipping over some really fun stuff here because the Williams brothers, most people, these jailhouse snitches are famous. People have seen numerous cases where they're seeing on television where the cross-examination says, what did you get for this? What deal did you get for this? Now tell us about the Williams, why they came in close proximity with Reldan. Why on earth Reldan would confide in these guys about a conspiracy to explain this, and then what happens with the Williams? Who do they contact? Is there a plea agreement? And if there isn't, why on earth would they do this? Explain a little bit more about the relationship, the kinds of things that Reldan started telling them, and what did they do as a result?
All right. Reldan's in prison. He's doing his 2 to 3 year term for the 2 B&Es. He has a close friend, a guy who he's come very close with down here. His name is Albert Barber, called the Buzzard is his nickname. And they're very close and spending a lot of time together down in Galway State Prison. The Williams brothers are really big-time break and entry guys. They are famous in New Jersey, in the South Jersey area, for the number of huge break and entries and stealing, thievery that they've been involved in, and probably murders too, although they've never been convicted of that. I mean, witnesses against them always had a strange way of disappearing just before trial. Anyway, they happen to get sent because they've been convicted on a B&E or something down in Trenton, and they go to Galway State Prison, and they are from the Atlantic City area, and they know Albert Barber, and Barber vouches for him. Barber he's awed by them. He's like hero worships of them because they're so big. So he is the one who really recommends them to Reldan. He vouches for them, and they get a job. Now Reldan has somehow here's a guy who just comes into jail and immediately gets a job in the office with one of the choice jobs in the officer's dining room in the commissary area, because he knows this Miss Lippert, who's a guard for the prison guard who knew him when he was in jail earlier in New Jersey. But so he speaks for them, Barbara does, and they get this job, and Reldan gets them hired. He talks to Miss Lippert, and sure, if you want him, Bob, will. And that was another indication of the charm this guy had. He gets a prison guard to do his bidding, who he wants hired to work with him in these very plush jobs that everyone in the prison wants these jobs. But he gets them there. So they are very close. And Reldan has been thinking, according to the Williams brothers, Reldan has been thinking about this plan. His initial plan is to rob the ant. He wants to go and get a lot of money to help pay for a defense. As it progresses, about the time he is indicted on the murders. Now, that happens in January of 1977, I believe, January 20th, 77. He's indicted on the murders. And it's a surprise. He didn't think it was going to happen at that time. But he's indicted, and now it sort of changes at the same time. Never mind the robbery, let's murder her. And so the idea is it's not the Williams brothers going to do the murder because they're in jail with him. He wants it done immediately, and he wants them to provide a hitman. Now, the Williams brothers don't know if they're being set up. I mean, they are people who were targeted by law enforcement for years, and they didn't know if they were being set up. So one of the things they do is they decide, well, we'll call the police and let them know what's happening. And they reach out to because the indictment, the news of the indictment was released on January 20th of 77, and it was in the paper. So the Williams asked his wife to call the prosecutor's office in Bergen County, and she calls and tells Ed Benning, who was the chief investigator on the murder cases, that the brothers have information concerning these murders. Now, right away, the red flags go up. As you start to say, you can't believe much of what the prison inmates tell you. You know, they're looking for a deal, trying to buy some time off their sentence, whatever it is, they're looking for something. But he goes down and talks to them, and after telling all the story about this comments that the Reldan made about moving the bodies and things like that, they say, oh, by the way, he's also got us involved in a plan to kill the ant. And this is like some off the wall. Denning can't believe this is happening. So, but they give it some credence. They see letters back and forth between Reldan, who was transferred from Rawway to Trent State Prison after he's indicted on the murders, a more secure location. And now there's Al, Barbara, and Reldan are sending letters back and forth, which have references to this other job that needs to be done involving the Williams brothers. So they finally decide to have a meeting with a guy that the Williams brothers have selected, and it turns out to be a Nick Gallo, who is an investigator that I worked with in the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office. He's a guy who's very good at this kind of work. He's done many of them. He goes down and has conversations with Reldan in jail. And in the second one, I mean, it's a face-to-face in the prison yard, and Reldan lays it all out. He wants this woman killed. It doesn't bother him that it's his aunt. He wants the boyfriend killed. He wants it done. It can't be done till May because he needs the aunt to make the money available for the defense on the murder cases. So he doesn't want anything to interfere with that until after that's all set up. Then they can murder him. So it's that time after all that goes. I think it's sometime in March 30th, something like that they get down and arrest Albert Barber and Robert Reldan for the murders and move the Williams brothers out of Trenton because their lives were in danger once it became known that they had ratted on Reldan. So that, I mean, then it happens, you know, that Reldan's now charged with 2 indictments. No, he's not indicted till April in the plan to kill the ant. But by the time May of 1977, 1977, he's got 2 big indictments. One, a plan to conspiracy to kill his aunt and her boyfriend, and the murder of Susan Reeve and Susan Haynes. These are both hanging over his head, and now the problem becomes which case gets tried first, and how do we proceed? So
why does you talked about, and we said you talk about in your book too, that right away once there was this murder indictment, his big high-powered law team just said, "See you later." Now, Why is that? Did they figure he wouldn't be able to afford? Why wouldn't they stay for?
That's exactly the point. They knew that that Reldan hadn't provided the initial $75,000. They knew it had come from Aunt Lillian. Now they didn't know that Lillian was going to stick by Reldan all through that trial. But they assumed that the source of funds had now dried up. They immediately, within a day or so, had the motion to withdraw from New Jersey. You know, if you're an out-of-state attorney and you get permission to come to state to handle a case like this, if you want to get out, you've got to get out almost immediately. Once you're in for a period of time, the courts won't let you leave. That's the problem.
Yeah,
they made a professional decision. Let's get out of here before it's too late, and we have to try this Reldan case and have no money coming in from it. So that's what.
Yeah.
happened.
Plus, they just knew they had a sinking ship there with that kind of client as well, right? Talking.
And all through the trial, she in fact, Aunt Lillian testified for Reldan in the trial of the charges to kill her and her friend Misha, and she just wouldn't believe it was him. She never even changed her will. She just didn't care. Bobby wouldn't do this to me. He was her favorite. So,
how on earth did he talk her into believing that the prosecutors and the police were somehow mistaken, or he was innocent of this conspiracy to murder her and her companion?
Well, I told you how charming he was. He just could charm women. But really, what he did, he came up with a story. His story was that he knew this. He knew that the Williams brothers were really working with the police, and he decided to embarrass them. He was going to go along with them, and at the very last minute, he was going to call a newspaper reporter from the Bergen Record, who he was friendly with, and lay the whole story out. But he says it was frustrating because the prosecutors got their indictment so quickly, he didn't have a chance to tell everyone that he was in on this all the way. I mean, it was ridiculous, but what else could he say? That was his argument. And it was
she continued.
Excuse me?
So she continued to support him. She testified for him. She didn't change her will, and then she died in 2007.
Yes.
And giving him $8.9 million.
Well, what she did was, I think there were 6 brothers and sisters. She gave 5. There were 5 brothers and sisters left, and she gave each of them whatever it was, $20-some million. And then it's go to her sister and brother. Now, William Reldan's mother died, Marie, so her $20 million were thereabouts was divided between Susan, Bob's sister, and himself. That's how they each get 8.9. It was really the mother's money, which was going to them because the mother had died.
Yeah.
So that's how the money got split up. And so, Reldan lost his money, but his sister still has the money, and she continues to financially support him, especially with respect to his attempt to overturn this 20-year parole ineligibility that he was hit with the last time he was up for parole. I mean, they denied him at that time and fixed a 20-year additional period before he'd be eligible for parole. So they're attacking that through an appeal, and also the state legislature in New Jersey has now changed the law, and I think it requires that he get a parole hearing every 3 years, which, it's a problem. A guy like this with his money, each year he's going to come up and they're going to have all kinds of arguments why he should get out of jail. He's no threat anymore. His sister has the money. He gave up his money. I mean, he agreed to the consent judgment for $10 million, showing his, how generous he is. He didn't want the money. Sure, give it to Mr. and Mrs. Reeve. All these arguments as to why he should get out of jail. But it's being financed by his sister.
Now, you talked about the Reeves petitioning to the courts through civil court to get money, and they were successful. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, this is not a son of Sam case. A criminal by law in most states cannot profit from his own criminal activity. This is not that kind of case. This money did not come from his criminal activity. It came as an inheritance from his aunt. Now, they had changed the law in the state of New Jersey in terms of the statute of limitations. Usually the statute of limitations is about 2 years on civil matters. But back in early in the 1990s, they had changed the law on murders with respect to death, the wrongful death. They changed the statute of limitations. Say there is no statute of limitations on wrongful death. If you murder someone and someone or relative can prove a loss of a wrongful death, a loss of income or something like that, you can sue. The problem with that is they omitted the survivor aspect of it. The survivors are different. Your claim for survivorship is the loss of companionship, the love and affection you would have had back and forth between the decedent, the person who was murdered, and the family, and they had omitted that. It was an accident. So Mr. Reeve hired an attorney named Robert Zeller, who did an incredible job in terms of changing the law to get this overturned, to make also the Survivor Act not have a statute of limitation. And he did that, and actually Governor Corzine signed that bill on almost his last day in office here to change the law. And with that in his pocket, he had already filed suit. I mean, Reldan offered $1 million in settlement of this claim. They turned him down. It got to the point where it was going to have to be a trial, and Reldan threw in the towel and agreed to a $10 million judgment against himself. And the money it wasn't immediately all paid out. It was paid because the money's in trust, really. Reldan never had it. Sure. It's all held in trust. And so it's paid over a period of time, and if Reldan dies, that may be the end of it. I forget now all the workings, the mechanics of this, but the most they get is $10 million. They could end up with less, but it doesn't matter. I mean, this man, Mr. Reeve is a wonderful guy. Mrs. Reeve, she was in court every day. These 3 murder trials. It wasn't the money. It was just the idea he could not stand the idea that this guy would be living, have the benefit of $10 million, and he murdered his daughter. He just couldn't stand that. And he just was not going to say no, till he got this changed and straightened out.
Yeah, it's an interesting story. The only other one I heard of anything successful like that, just for the principle, was the Nicole Brown Simpson case with the father.
That's
he got OJ, boy, I'll tell you. He got him in jail and got the money too. So a little bit of a happy ending, but there really is no happy endings in these stories, right? So
the interesting thing about Reldan is, we had I told you, the first time he was tried on the attack on Marie Hernandez, the very first big case he's involved in, he gets a hung jury, and they have to be tried again. The Kaplan rape case, first trial, he gets a hung jury. His first murder trial, the double murder trial, happens in 1979, in, I guess, May of 1979. He gets a hung jury. One of the jurors fell in love with him. One of the jurors just disregarded her oath completely and just said in there, I am not convicting him. His family's there. This man can't have been the one who done this. We know that for a fact because one of the jurors was the daughter of a Bergen County prosecutor's office detective. Now, the defendants knew who she was, but they decided to take her. She was an African-American, and I think they liked the idea of having some diversity, maybe, feeling about police and don't trust the police. They put her on. But she told us that that's what happened. This woman fell in love with Reldan, and she wasn't going to. Now, that's a third hung jury. It's just an incredible development. The second trial, because the first trial had been hung up in that way, I think the county prosecutor decided he's going to throw everything in. And he brought in this other crimes evidence involving the rape of Mrs. Kaplan and the assault on Mrs. Mott, Miss Mott at the time. And the courts found that was, the trial judge allowed it, but the appellate courts ruled that was too prejudicial defendant, and they threw the conviction out. So it took 3 trials to try them for these murders. And the things that happened, I mean, he jumped out the third-story window of the courthouse during the second trial. While he was in jail before the appeal, before the conviction was reversed, during the second trial, he developed a friendship with a very pretty woman who was a spectator in the courtroom. And she used to talk to him during breaks, which Nick Gallo was just furious about. Anyway, he gets her to come down on Easter Sunday, to come down to the hospital, and with a loaded shotgun in the bag, ready to help him shoot his way out of jail. I mean, it's hard to believe these things are happening. But that was Reldan.
Yeah, he's a little bit of Bundy. I think he's just a classic serial killer, really, because he's the consummate, kind of like a Ted Bundy, very, very charming, really, but really hell-bent on having his way and being violent, just for violence.
Everyone asked, were there any other murders he could have done? And we sort of researched this. He was out of jail for such little periods. From the time he first got out of jail back when he was put in for the violation of probation back in, 72? 62. He was always in jail, and there was never any unknown, open murders that were done when he was out of the prison until these two happened with Susan Reeve and Susan Haynes. So everyone just says there had to be more, but in terms of being a serial killer, but he wasn't free at the time. So.
Yeah, it's interesting too the role that Judith plays in this, but we won't give it away because I'm sure the reader would like to hear how Judith was really crucial in, again, enabling. He had an alibi, and so, but that story's quite interesting little aside to the trial as well. What Judith Rosenberg did in this as well, and her contribution.
Yeah. Well, but you understand that a wife. She was madly in love with him. She believed him.
Sure.
He had women do what he would ask them to do. So.
Like I said, I think he has all the character. I've done this for a few years now, and he is has the same kind of characteristics as a lot of these guys, the Bundy, the Ramirez. Yeah. You have to have a lot of charm to be able to do what this gentleman did, and yet, you go from charming to just rage. So it's interesting. So
the funny thing is, I don't know if we're over time or anything, but when I was trying it for the third time, I didn't try it the first two times. The county prosecutor's office tried it, but the defense argued there was a conflict of interest, so they sent me up from Trent to try the third case. When I was trying the case, there were two men in the courtroom, and each day they're writing everything, copious notes. And I got talking to them, and they're writing. They're going to write a book. Now this is 1986. They're going to write a book on Robert Reldan, about these two murder cases. I think, well, that's great. So I wait. I mean, I'm back to office. I'm doing other things. I retire in '95. But there's never a book. Then I get assigned up as the acting prosecutor in Bergen County for a couple of years, and I now have access to all this information. I said, let me try to take a look at this and see if I can write a book. And I started writing. I wrote about 5 chapters. I read it, and I realized I don't have the skills that are needed to make this a saleable product. But I did know Rich Muti, and we worked together in the office, and I knew he had written a book. And I spoke to him. At first, he wasn't too enthused about it, but I gave him about 12 boxes of material. He read through it all. He said, there is a book here. And that's when we started together, putting this together. And it was, I guess, a 3-year job, and we're very proud of what we were able to put together. So that's
Absolutely.
Where we stand.
No. Yeah, it's a very great read. It's it's hard, as you know, to take the research and then turn that into exciting page turners.
Right.
You've done it. You've done it, and that's why it takes so long to do that, because, as you know, you've got to pour over it and go, well, we've got to take that out, and we really have to. You have to really cut out all the fat, and there's a lot of stuff that you got to go through. Like you say, boxes and boxes of stuff that could be in there, should be in there maybe, but
Yeah.
And
Rich was very adept at doing exactly that. I mean, when I write something with 25 pages. He'd do it in 7 or 8 because he just knew he had an author's concept as to what's needed to just get by. You just can't put every single thing in a book. It'll be like War and Peace. He says you just can't do that. So what's turned out is primarily his final product, and in my mind, it's really great. So very happy.
Great. It's very good, and you've done a great interview yourself, and I want to thank you this evening for explaining the book to our audience as well. We have a rabid true crime fanship here, and people comment all the time, so I'll let you know what kind of numbers and if anybody did make any specific comments or inquiries. But people just love the show, and thank you very much for coming on and explaining about this book, The Charmer, about Robert Reldan and Reldan, and his fascinating tale and his incredible aunt who stuck by him all the way. That's an amazing story of naivety and family sticking together just for family's sake. Wow, what a story, So I want to thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Charles. And just before I go, is there a website that you have for this book? Obviously, people go to Amazon and they go to their local bookstore, and people can look you guys up, and it's easy to type in The Charmer as well. But is there any special website you have or any information?
No, not that I have, no. Now, whether Rich has one, I'm not sure.
Right. Well, people, like I say,
so.
Amazon's a great marketer for books. Everybody goes to Amazon, and you can't beat the prices, and I'm sure it's going to be in bookstores as well. And Titletown's a publisher, too. So in the last couple of years, they've been quite prominent in publishing really good titles and with some good authors and some great stories. So
they've been very nice to work with. Okay, Dan, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night, Charles.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Bye.